Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are doing something a little different today. Usually we're looking at nonfiction articles, news, hard data.
Right.
But today, we're cracking open a script. It's from episode 3 of The Grand Fled Jury, the one titled Counsel for the Forgotten.
And I know what you might be thinking. A fictional courtroom drama.
Exactly. Why are we analyzing fiction?
It's a fair question, but when I read this, I realized pretty quickly this isn't really fiction. The characters are made up, sure. But the argument, the one happening in this courtroom,
It's completely real.
it's very real. It's like a mirror held up to every broken bureaucratic system we have to deal with in our own lives.
That is what got me too. It felt less like a story and more like, I don't know, a therapy session for anyone who's ever waited on hold with, like, an insurance company.
Or worked in a totally understaffed office. The stakes here aren't about who killed who. It's much, much deeper than that.
Right. In a typical legal drama, you're looking for the smoking gun. You want to know who the villain is.
So you can see them get handcuffed at the end. But in Counsel for the Forgotten, the script, it goes out of its way to tell you there is no villain.
Which is so frustrating. The intro to the source material even sets the scene. It says this is the moment when someone finally speaks for what everyone else avoided naming.
That's such a great line.
It gave me chills, but I wasn't totally sure what they were avoiding naming at first.
Failure. But not just any failure, it's the specific kind of failure that happens when good people are put in, well, impossible situations.
So the core conflict we're diving into is this philosophical battle. On one side, you have the defense arguing for what they call systemic exhaustion.
And on the other, you have prosecutor Child arguing for predictable harm.
Okay, let's unpack those terms.
Yeah.
Because systemic exhaustion sounds like something I feel every single Friday afternoon.
Huh, right.
Right.
But in a legal sense, what they're actually arguing is, well, imagine the defense's position here. They aren't defending a person.
They're defending the system itself.
Exactly. The script describes the defense attorney as measured, calm. They stand up and say, I represent the systems that stayed standing when everyone else walked away.
Wow, that's a bold opening.
Yeah.
It sounds heroic, actually.
It is. It's meant to.
Yeah.
They're the last line of defense, and that's what makes the argument so seductive.
How so?
The defense is arguing that the system, the clerks, the administrators, the managers, they aren't bad people. They're just overwhelmed. They call it the impossible math of caring about everything without breaking.
The impossible math. I circled that in my notes. It implies that failure isn't a choice. It's a calculation.
It's just math. If you have 100 cases and you only have time for 10.
90 people are going to have a bad time. It's not personal.
Precisely. And this is where the script introduces something called Exhibit A. Now, usually Exhibit A is a weapon or a contract.
That's a knife, yeah.
Here, the defense says Exhibit A is volume.
Volume. As in just the sheer amount of stuff.
Yes, the sheer amount. The defense lists it out. Thousands of complaints, hundreds of hearings, finite hands, finite time.
They're making a very sophisticated argument about capacity.
It's a triage problem.
It is.
Yeah.
If you're a doctor in a war zone, you have 10 patients and 1 bandage, you have to choose. The defense is saying, don't put me on trial for the 9 people I couldn't save.
I didn't kill them. The math did.
And that actually makes a certain kind of sense. I mean, if I'm an overworked clerk and I literally cannot get to the bottom of the pile, is it really my fault if a file gets lost?
The defense says someone always falls through. It's treated like a law of physics, like gravity.
It's the overload defense.
Yeah.
They really emphasized there was no mustache-twirling villain,
Right.
shutting the file cabinet. It wasn't cruelty. It was just too much.
And the script does something really clever here. It shows us how comforting that argument feels.
Comforting. How do you mean?
Well, think about it. If the problem is just volume, then nobody is actually guilty. It's just an unfortunate situation. It absolves everyone in the room. It absolves them of personal responsibility.
It says, you did your best wasn't enough, but that's okay because you're only human. It's telling the jury, hey, you've been tired too, you've dropped the ball, don't judge us.
Exactly. And to drive that point home, there's a character named Marjorie. Now, she seems to be someone who was actually hurt by this system.
Yeah, that was a strange moment. She interrupts the proceedings. Harold, the defendant, is shocked. But Marjorie cuts him off and actually agrees with the defense.
She says truth still gets the floor.
Why do you think she does that? It seems counterintuitive.
I think it's validation. Even as the victim, she recognizes the reality of the situation. It adds so much nuance. It forces us, the audience, to accept that the defense isn't just making stuff up. They really were overwhelmed.
But then The defense takes it a step further, and this is where it gets dangerous.
Right. The warning, the slippery slope argument.
They tell the jury, if this court rules guilt, then everything collapses. Every clerk, every office, every human limit becomes a crime.
And that is terrifying. They're saying, if you punish us for being overwhelmed, you are effectively criminalizing being human, because we all have limits.
So if reaching your limit is a crime, then we are all criminals.
It makes you feel like you have to side with the defense almost for self-preservation. You don't want to live in a world where just being tired can get you sued.
It makes the defense look like a necessary part of the system. The narrator even says the defense looks necessary.
So at this point in the script, the defense is winning. They have logic, empathy, the impossible math. Everything is on their side.
But then Prosecutor Child stands up, and the vibe just completely changes.
Completely. The script describes the prosecutor as quiet, steady. They don't come in screaming. They don't have to.
So the defense has spent all this time proving they didn't intend to hurt anyone.
They had no malice.
And Prosecutor Child basically says, I know.
Right. They grant them that premise. Sure, you had no bad intent, but then they ask the one question that just destroys the defense's entire case.
Where does responsibility live when harm is predictable?
Predictable harm. That's the phrase. That's the whole thing.
It changes the entire metric. We aren't talking about intent anymore.
We're talking about predictability. If you build a bridge that you know can only hold 10 cars, and you let 100 cars drive on it,
And it collapses.
you can stand there and say, I didn't intend for it to collapse. I love bridges. But the prosecutor's saying, you knew the math. You knew it would fail.
Therefore, the failure wasn't an accident. It was a choice.
Oof. That takes the volume argument and turns it into a weapon.
The defense said, look at the volume, we couldn't handle it. And the prosecutor saying, exactly. You saw the volume, you knew you couldn't handle it, and you kept the system running anyway.
It's the difference between a mistake and a design flaw. The defense argues it's a mistake. The prosecutor argues the harm is baked right into the design. If you know someone always falls through, then that person's suffering is just. It's part of your business model.
And the defense tries to pivot. They say, okay, well, responsibility lives in reform, not blame.
Classic corporate speak. Let's just move forward.
The old lessons learned approach. We'll do better next time.
The prosecutor child just shuts that down. They say, reform requires acknowledgement. You can't fix a system if you refuse to look at the wreckage it created.
This back and forth is so intellectual, though. It's logic against logic. But then the script just drops the emotional hammer.
The voicemail. This is the pivot point of the whole episode. We move from abstract concepts, volume systems, to a specific human cost.
The prosecutor slides the transcript across the table. It's just one sentence. I'm going to read it because the way it's just isolated on the page, it just says, please, someone just tell me if I matter.
It just stops you cold, doesn't it?
It does. It's quiet in the stereo just hearing it again.
Up until now, we've been talking about files and cases and volume, abstract things. This voicemail forces everyone to remember that every single one of those dropped files was a person.
A person begging to be heard.
Yeah. And Harold, the guy representing the system, he tries to deflect one last time. He whispers, that call never reached my desk.
He's going right back to the finite hands argument. I didn't see it, so I'm not responsible.
The bureaucratic shield. Not my department.
But the prosecutor's response?
No, but the silence did.
But the silence did. That might be the most important line in the entire script.
What does that actually mean, though? How can silence reach someone?
It means that silence is an action. We tend to think of silence as neutral, as a lack of action. But in a system like this, silence is a weapon. When that person called and asked, do I matter? And the system gave them nothing back, that wasn't just a clerical error.
That was an answer.
That was an answer. And the answer was no.
Wow. So the silence itself did the harm. It traveled.
Exactly. The narrator calls this the fracture. It's where procedure meets consequence. Harold is thinking about his procedure. I checked the box. I didn't get the memo. But the consequence is a human being feeling completely erased.
So the prosecutor's arguing you're responsible for the silence you create, even if you didn't mean to create it. It's the difference between being malicious and being negligent. Or maybe something even deeper than that.
Systemic indifference.
Dehumanization by bureaucracy. That impossible math the defense loved so much, the prosecutor is revealing that the cost of that math is human dignity. You can't use math to explain away why someone doesn't matter.
So now the jury is just stuck. On one hand, you have the necessary defense. We're only human. We were overwhelmed.
And on the other, predictable harm. You knew this would happen, and your silence destroyed people. How do you resolve that?
Well, the script does something fascinating. It refuses to give us a standard verdict.
The Dewey foreperson calls for a recess, but before they leave, they reframe the entire trial.
The foreperson says the question is no longer who is guilty, which is wild. That's the only question a jury is supposed to answer.
But guilt implies that mustache-twirling villain again. It implies malice. And the jury seems to accept that Harold didn't want to hurt anyone, so guilty doesn't fit.
But innocent definitely doesn't fit either.
Not at all. So they need a new question.
And the foreperson says, the question is, who stayed silent long enough to become responsible?
Who stayed silent long enough to become responsible? The phrasing is so specific.
It shifts the focus from a single act to a duration. It's not about what you did on one Tuesday. It's about what you didn't do for 10 years.
It's like that old saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
It's similar, but I think it's more nuanced. It acknowledges that doing nothing is sometimes just exhaustion.
But if you do nothing for long enough, eventually that exhaustion hardens into complicity. You become part of the wall that keeps people out.
So if I see a problem at work and I ignore it once because I'm busy, that's exhaustion. But if I ignore it every day for 5 years and I know people are getting hurt by it,
that's responsibility. At that point, you have become the silence.
The episode ends on this really striking visual, the gavel.
Right. The script really emphasizes this. The gavel is just resting on the woodblock. It says, not struck.
Usually the bang of the gavel is the climax. It's the order in the court moment. It's finality.
But here, the lack of the strike tells us everything. A gavel is a binary tool. It decides yes or no, guilty or not guilty.
But the problem this episode describes, systemic neglect, burnout, the impossible math, it can't be solved with a gavel.
Because if you strike it and say guilty, you punish people for being human. But if you strike it and say not guilty, you tell every victim they don't matter.
The system literally can't process its own failure. There's no box on the verdict form for, we tried our best, but it wasn't enough and people got hurt anyway.
It leaves us in this really uncomfortable place. It doesn't wrap it up with a bow. It leaves that tension hanging right there in the room.
And that's the point, I think. The mirror we talked about at the beginning, it's reflecting that discomfort right back onto us.
It's easy to listen to this and think about the government or some big faceless corporation.
But I'm sitting here thinking about my own life.
Yeah.
The emails I haven't answered, the friends I haven't called back because I'm just too overwhelmed.
We all use the volume defense. I'm just so busy, so much on my plate. And, usually that's true. We are busy.
Of course.
But this script challenges us to look at the cost of that busyness. Who is falling through the cracks of our own impossible math?
And are we staying silent long enough to become responsible for it?
That's the question.
It's a haunting one. Usually we try to give you a clear takeaway. Here are 3 steps to fix bureaucracy. But today, I think the takeaway is just awareness.
Awareness of the silence. And recognizing that I didn't mean to isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card when the harm was predictable.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone with one final thought, something that I think bridges the gap between the defense and the prosecutor.
Okay.
The defense warned us, if we rule guilt, every human limit becomes a crime. And that scares me. But the prosecutor showed us that if we don't, then silence becomes the law of the land.
So here's the provocation for you to chew on. We accept that human limits are real. We accept that you can't do everything. But at what exact point does the phrase, I was too busy, stop being a valid reason and start being a confession?
Where's that line?
The script doesn't draw it for us. We have to draw it for ourselves.
I think I'm going to be thinking of that line all week. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the script with us today. It was heavy, but necessary.
It was. Thank you.
We'll leave the gavel resting there. See you next time.